Okay, a number of you have been asking me about build videos for the new Heritage Bundle ships. So let's start with the Typhon, because at this point it's pretty safe to assume that that's the most popular one of the three. Okay, so what I did for the Typhon is sort of a mix of two themes I've done pretty extensively on this channel before, admittedly. So this is a lazy boat that is also a combination of my fighter support build, which honestly shouldn't be that much of a surprise given the console and trait that this thing comes with. That's not to suggest that you have to go with this setup for the ship. There's a number of other things you could do with the ship, but that's what I did with this. It is a full command ship, so I could have gone with a torpedo build, or I could have stuck with the energy weapons and gone with something more forward-facing, like a dual heavy cannon scatter volley build, or dual beam bang fire at will. But the console buffs turrets, so I went with turrets. Starting off in the gear, obviously I went with a bunch of turrets. I went with agony phasers. You can use whatever you want, it's really just flavor at this point. It's not going to make a huge difference unless you're wanting to really push the edge for DPS, and if you're really doing that, you're not going to be using a turret build. Additionally, in the back, I've got the Pavin Proton Omni Beam. This is mainly here for its resonance charge ability. Because of that, it's proven to be more effective than pretty much every other set Omni in the game, which I know is weird, but there it is. You'll see why in the parse. And the really nice thing about this is that this Omni Beam still functions under the effects of Scatter Volley, so once you hit Scatter Volley for your cannons, it will get fire at will. So this Omni Beam is perfectly usable on a build that uses cannons like this one. Now, the Pavin Proton set was part of an event reward, so if you missed out on that, then just substitute in another turret. I've also added one additional thing that I don't normally do with my lazy boats, and that's that I added a torpedo into this one, specifically the wide-angle quantum torpedo off of any C-Store version of the Sovereign. This was meant to get a bit more damage out of the build. 100% energy weapon builds are kind of a thing of the past and really just kind of a meme at this point, so if you really want to get some actual DPS out of it, you want to mix in a torpedo. Now, if I was smart, I probably should have mixed in a Maelstrom torpedo instead, but I went with a wide-angle quantum here just to kind of fit into the theme of the turrets, to have as much coverage as possible among all my arcs. And unfortunately, there are currently no wide-angle Maelstrom torpedoes. Hint hint, cryptic. Now, the wide-angle quantum torpedo does require a C-Store ship purchase, mainly because it comes off of any version of the Sovereign class. So, alternatively, you could also go with the prolonged photon torpedo, which you can pick up in the Phoenix Prize store. For the core gear, I have mixed things up a little bit in here. I'm still using the Colony Deflector for the buffs to crit chance and crit severity, but because this build is going to be utilizing Fortress mode, I didn't feel like the competitive engines were going to be that useful because their speed buff really doesn't do much to overcome the speed nerf from the Fortress mode. So instead, I decided to use the Impulse engine from the Discovery reputation to get the two-piece with the shield. This way I could get away with using the Tholian Nucleating Warp Core for its Warp Crystals ability, instead of the Discovery Reputation Warp Core to get the two-piece with the shield. Now, of course, the Tholian set was part of another event reward, so if you missed out on that, then you could switch this up a little bit to include more of the Discovery set, like you can include the Warp Core from the Discovery set to get Mycelial Lightning. Or you could stick with the two-piece and go with the Discovery Warp Core and Shield, and swap out the Discovery Engine for the Romulan Reputation Engine to get a little bit more crit severity. Mycelial Lightning will probably do more damage overall, but it will also generate quite a bit more threat. So it's up to you on which direction you want to go in. In the devices, I've got pretty much my usual setup. Energy amplifiers for the bonus damage to my energy weapons, deuterium surplus for the bonus speed buff. Though if you're going to be relying more on Fortress mode, you're probably not going to be moving around that much, so you may want to skip these and go for reactive armor catalyst instead. I've also got the Kobayashi Maru on here, and the flagship Distress Frequency Transponder here, because the chance to summon in an Odyssey class is just too good for me to pass up. In the consoles, first I've got a bunch of the Hangarcraft Power Transmission Advanced Engineering consoles, which obviously I do because this is a carrier build. I'm wanting to buff the Hangar Pets as much as I possibly can, so I'm going to want a bunch of these. Additionally, for supporting the fighters, I've also got the High Energy Communication Network off of the support carriers. This offers a variety of buffs, most of which really aren't all that helpful, honestly, but the main reason to use this one is to get the +1 rank up for all of your fighters. The higher the rank of the fighters, the more damage they do, so you want to get that leveled up as quickly as possible. I've also got Sensor Suspension Burst off of the Jarok Alliance carrier. This will be giving some extra crit chance to my fighter pets when I activate it. The rest of the consoles here are more for the sake of the ship itself. Obviously, I have the Typhon Fortress mode here because, well, it's kind of part of the theme of the ship, and I really wanted to feed into that, see how well it does. You'll see just how well it does, or rather, doesn't do later. But this is also part of the reason why I'm running a turret build on this thing, because this offers a 33% bonus damage buff to all turret weapons, plus an additional 10% crit severity for all directed energy weapons. And then the active ability on it basically allows the ship to kind of turtle up, as I've been calling it. It deploys a bunch of armor, and then it deploys these 8 auto turrets around the ship. There are 8 total, each covering a 45-degree arc around the entirety of the ship, so it will be able to fire in every direction, and it'll just fire those turrets at anything that is within those arcs. While you're in Fortress mode, your speed is significantly reduced. It'll handle much like how Jelly mode handles on the Nidarian, but it also gives a decent buff to your damage resistance rating. Fortress mode can last up to 30 seconds, and then it will automatically deactivate. Upon its expiration, you will gain a buff to flight speed, turn rate, and inertia rating that will be equivalent to how long that you spent in Fortress mode to begin with. So the longer you're in Fortress mode, the faster you can shoot your way out of there when you deactivate it. I've also got Fleet Power Network Array off of the Awani. This is here to both support the ship and the pets, because the haste buff off of this thing will apply to both your ship and to any pets that you control. Alternatively, this can be applied to a friend, and it'll then apply the haste buff to them and their pets. Though this isn't a support build, so I don't really know why you would want to do that in this case. Next is Subspace Fracture Tunneling Field, which this is the console that comes off of the Tier 6 Obelisk, which was just released as the ship from the summer event. This is here for 2 reasons. One, it's really good at lowering the cooldown of your universal consoles when it's activated, but also because of its ability to teleport your ship, which you can use while in Fortress mode. So even while you're suffering through that speed debuff from Fortress mode, you can still teleport yourself right in front of an enemy ship. And with this console's low cooldown, you'll be able to use that effect fairly often. And over here on the right is an energetic protomatter matrix infuser. This is here to get some more phaser damage for my turrets, and also for a chance at a passive heal whenever I activate a firing mode. This is mostly here to help enhance the survivability of the build. Normally, if I'm using these, I prefer to have at least 2 or 3, but, you know, I kind of needed room for all the pet support consoles. And lastly in the consoles is definitely going to be the most expensive one, Experimental Power Redirection off of the Excelsior 2. This is here mostly because, one, it's one of my favorite consoles, but also because it really feels like it fits thematically well with Fortress mode, given that it just fires beams in every freaking direction when you activate it. It kind of fits with Fortress mode in my opinion, which just fires turrets in every direction, so thematically they felt appropriate to pair with each other, but I get that this is a very expensive console, not everyone's going to have it because Excelsior 2 is a lockbox ship. There are plenty of other things you could substitute this with. You know, there's plenty of other things that buff your own damage, like the DPRM, the Domino, the M6, the flagship tactical computer. There's also Swarmer Matrix to get a little bit more damage out of the pets. Or you could throw in another Protomatter Infuser. Or, since I'm already using the T6 Obelisk console, you could work in the full set for some additional pets. For the fighters, I'm doing very similar to what I did on the Awani, using one hangar bay of the new Valor fighters instead of the Valkyries. These have proven to be pretty effective, but they are exclusive to the full bundle, so if you wanted, you could just as easily swap these out for some normal Valkyrie fighters. Or if you have the legendary Akira, you can use the Kodai versions because those mesh well with command ships. Or you could just go with 2 hangar bays of the Type 7 shuttles because these are really great for all the debuff that they can put out. Moving on to the personal space traits, most of these are just from my usual energy weapons setup, only the first 4 are specific to this fighter support build. You know, much like the one I did in the Awani. So I'm only going to go over those first 4, the rest of them will be listed on the screen though. The first one is Independent Wingmate. This one's nice for giving a bonus damage buff to the first fighter that you launch. Buffing one single pet might not sound like a lot, but it is a 200% bonus damage buff, so it's not insignificant. If the fighter that has the buff is destroyed, it'll end up going to the next one that you launch. Wing Commander to buff the rate that the fighters build up XP so they can rank up that much faster. Remember, the higher they are ranked, the better the fighters will perform. Feel the Weight of Our Presence applies a damage resistance debuff to any enemies that are within 12 kilometers of you based on the number of pets that you have, maxing out at 12.5 for 25 allies. These allies can count from turret devices, distress beacon pets, other summon pets, and hangar pets. And lastly is Holographic Mirage Decoys. This will give some temporary immunity when you first launch your fighters, just to give them a little extra survivability. Though, honestly, if I could get just one more personal space trait that buffs my fighter pet damage, this would be the first thing I'd trade out. Moving on to the starship traits, first is Withering Barrage, because this is a turret build, so I'm going to be using Scatter Volley, so obviously I want to extend Scatter Volley's duration as much as I can. This is available on the T6 Defiant, the Legendary Defiant, that one free bird of prey you get from the Klingon recruitment event, and like 4 other ships. Honestly, it's kind of hard not to have Withering Barrage at this point. Next is Emergency Weapon Cycle off of the Arbiter, as well as a bunch of other Tier 6 ships at this point. This is a very common starship trait to be using on energy weapon builds, and I am using that to help buff the turrets a bit. The rest of these starship traits are going to be for the sake of the fighters, the first being Strike Group Command Authority off of the Hydra. This one gives bonus damage buffs to your pets. The strength of that buff will depend on the type of pet. I'm not using anything that's going to be creating any kind of summon pet, so we're really just going to be getting that 30% for the fighters. 30% isn't bad though, especially considering the number of fighters I'll be able to summon with this build. Next is Superior Area Denial off of the Mirror Angle Strikewing Escort. This is a highly sought after starship trait for carrier builds because it is capable of giving your pets the ability to use Fire, Will, and Scatter Volley. Whenever your bridge officers activate either one of those abilities, your fighter pets will then gain both of those abilities at the same time. The next starship trait is off of the Typhon itself, Repurposed Cargo Bay Hangar. This starship trait is the thing that really got me excited about this ship, because what it does is every time you launch a fighter pet, it will launch its own fighter pet. Specifically, it'll launch an advanced level Valkyrie fighter squadron. Maxing out at 6 additional pets, this starship trait is effectively a third hangar for this ship. And those additional fighter pets will function just like your normal hangar pets. They will receive the same buffs that your normal pets do. They're affected under Superior Air Denial. They're just like normal hangar pets. Next up is Flagship Staffing off of the Awani Command Carrier. What this does is anytime I activate a Command Bridge Officer ability or a Healing Bridge Officer ability, this will lower the cooldown of any of my firing mode abilities down to its minimal cooldown, and it'll give me some extra firing cycle haste. And the last starship trait on here is Cooperation is the Dominant Strategy off of the Friendship. With this starship trait, anytime I use a Bridge Officer ability or a Universal Console ability on an allied ship, that ship will gain a stack of the Friendship is Science buff. Non-hangar pet allies will gain a plus 10% bonus damage buff for 30 seconds, and allied hangar pets will gain plus 20%. And that's per stack. Now, the big downside with this starship trait is that it can only be triggered on an allied ship, so anything that is not you. But my friend Cinder over at Galactic Gaming showed me this neat little trick. The Bridge Officer ability Needs of the Many sacrifices your own shield power to apply temporary hull to any teammates nearby. This includes non-player teammates like friendly allied NPCs, including your own pets. So just by using Needs of the Many, I can apply the Friendship is Science buff to my own pets, so all my fighters will be gaining 20% bonus damage buffs. And even better, this also works with Flagship Staffing, so my pets will also be gaining that additional 33% firing cycle haste buff. Now, while most of these are C-Store ship traits, not all of them are. Cooperation is the Dominant Strategy and Superior Area Denial are both off of lockbox ships. Now, there aren't going to be a lot of great alternatives for further buffering your hangar pets, especially if we're talking more budget-friendly traits. Like, there's Scramble Fighters that can be kind of useful for the pets, but it randomly drops out of the Delta Alliance Duty Officer packs. It doesn't even drop from the lockboxes. It drops out of a Duty Officer pack. So the RNG on getting that one to drop is kind of a pain, so this one ends up being very expensive on the exchange, despite the fact that it's not super effective. And from what I've heard, ever since this ship dropped, because it is a C-Store carrier, Scramble Fighters has only gotten more expensive on the exchange. Alternatively, if you're wanting something to help out with your survival, there's Greater Than the Sum. That can improve the survivability of you, your teammates, and your pets all at once. But if you're looking for other starship trait alternatives, you're best looking out for something that'll benefit an energy weapon build to buff your own weapons damage rather than the fighters. Because, like I said, there just aren't that many more starship traits that will give any sort of beneficial buff to your fighter pets. Okay, moving on to the space reputation traits. First is Advanced Targeting Systems for the crit severity buff, Precision and Tyler's Duality for their crit chance buffs, Magnified Firepower for their bonus damage to my weapons, and I actually went with Energy Refrequencer on this one just to get a little bit more passive healing on it for the sake of survivability, but if you're not really that concerned about heals, you could swap this out for controlled countermeasures. Now on to the Bridge Officer seating. In the Commander Tactical / Command seat, obviously I've got Cannon Scatter Volley 3 here because this is a turret build. Obviously I'm going to want Cannon Scatter Volley. I've also got Suppression Barrage 1 on here to debuff the damage output of my enemies. If you really wanted to further lean into the debuffing aspect of this build, you could swap these and go with Scatter Volley 2, and then you could bump up the Commander level seat to Suppression Barrage 3. Or if you went with a Fire at Will build instead, obviously Fire at Will 3 would only occupy the Lieutenant Commander seat, and then you could bump up Suppression Barrage to the Commander level seat, so you could have Suppression Barrage 3 there instead. But obviously that's up to you. And then in the Ensign seat is Torpedo Spread 1 to buff the torpedo I have in the build. Now, I did bring this up in my review video for this bundle, but for anyone who missed that or forgot about this, remember that this Lieutenant Commander Tactical seat, This is a bug. This is a mistake. That's not supposed to be Lieutenant Commander. This is only supposed to be a Lieutenant level tactical seat. That's why I've left this slot blank, because it's going to disappear, so there's no point in me getting used to it. As for the Lieutenant and Ensign level abilities, I've got Attack Pattern Beta for its debuff, as well as Chemosite Lace Weaponry for the extra radiation damage. In the Lieutenant Commander Engineering / Command seat, first I've got Emergency Power to Engines, just for a little bit of an extra speed buff, but not that I'm going to be using that a whole lot considering how much time I'm going to be spending in Fortress mode. I guess alternatively you could swap that to something else, maybe Emergency Power to Shields. Though actually thinking about it, there's really no reason for me to include a second Emergency Power ability because I'm not using Ship of the Line. So maybe I should have used Emergency Power to Weapons 1 and then used Emit Unstable Warp Bubble in the Lieutenant seat for an Uncon proc. That's probably what I should have done. But yeah, either way, in the Lieutenant Commander seat, I've got Concentrate Firepower 3. This is another reason why I decided to break my normal rule about using torpedoes on lazy boats, because normally I don't like to do that because there's no such thing as an omnidirectional torpedo bay, but at the same time, because of all the command seating on this thing, I had room for Concentrate Firepower 3, and not only would that buff my own torpedoes, but it would also buff the torpedoes of my hangar pets. I'm actually kind of glad this thing ended up having double command seating. I know a lot of people were complaining about that, saying it should have been like Command Miracle Worker or something, which, for one, no it shouldn't have. We've had like 8 Command Miracle Worker combos over the past year. I'm sick of it. But this meant I was able to use Suppression Barrage and Concentrate Firepower on the same energy weapon build. That's not always an easy thing to do unless you want to go with a really low-level firing mode ability. And lastly, both Universal seats I am using as Science seats for the sake of unconventional systems triggers. So that's Jam Targeting Sensors 1, Scramble Sensors 1, Gravity Well 1, and Tractor Beam 1. Lastly, in the Duty Officers, honestly, there really isn't much you can use to further buff your hangar pets for the Duty Officers. The only ones that are going to be really useful are the Flight Deck Officers that can reduce the cooldown of your hangar bay launches. And as you can see, I didn't even use one of those, but if you don't have Sensor Suspension Bursts, those can actually be pretty helpful. Beyond that, this is just my normal setup for an energy weapon build. Ooh, actually, if I'm ditching Emergency Power to Engines, I should probably ditch the Emergency Con hologram too. I'll probably just throw in another Energy Weapon Officer for crit chance or severity. Now let's move on to the combat log and see just how well this thing did. 324k out of Jupiter Gauntlet Elite. That's really not bad. Though, admittedly, this is one of the smoother runs that I had in my testing of this thing, because against other enemies, I was having a lot of trouble staying alive with this thing, especially against the Borg. But I had little trouble with dealing with these Fakiri. I think part of that is just because I'm so used to cruisers and other like tankier type ships. They're much more ideal for this kind of solo content. Despite this thing being a full command ship, I do have to remember that this is an escort, so it's going to be a bit squishier, even with Fortress mode. And the other thing there is that I am still flying with turrets, so they're really not the greatest thing for DPS compared to other cannon type weapons. Yeah, I like to do lazy boats like this for the sake of the meme because I think it's funny, and just to prove that they are doable, which they are, but this still would have performed better if I had been running like dual heavy cannons. But I wanted to run turrets on this thing for the sake of Fortress mode, which also didn't prove to be as great as I had hoped it would be. You can see on the combat log that the Fortress mode auto turrets did less than 6,000 DPS. That is really unimpressive for a console like this. I think the big problem with this console is that while it does deploy 8 turrets, each of those 8 turrets has a very narrow arc of only 45 degrees, so most of them really aren't going to be firing all that much, especially since most builds focused on some level of control, and you really want to just generally focus all of your enemies into one specific spot, so then you could take them out with AoE damage, like from Torpedo Spread or Cannon Scatter Volley. But that line of thinking really hurts Fortress mode because with all those narrow arcs, it's really dependent on you being completely surrounded. Though, even if you are completely surrounded, or change it up a little bit, even if they had wider firing arcs so you can get more of them firing at once, I still don't think the auto turrets are going to be doing that much damage. So, long story short, I really think the damage on Fortress mode really needs to be increased. Not that I think it ever will be, but it would be nice. Because as it is, after this video is done, I'm probably going to remove that from the build and then replace the turrets with dual heavy cannons. Oh, and before I move on to the pet damage, this is Resonance Shock. This is the special effect off the Pavin Beam, and as you can see, it did 38k, placing it in third underneath my phaser turrets under Scatter Volley 3. Keep in mind that the combat log groups multiple copies of the same weapon together, so that is all 4 of my Agony phaser turrets compared to just the Resonance Shock. And that's not even counting the actual proton damage from the Omni Beam itself, which was just under 10k. Yeah, that Resonance Shock ability, it's absolutely insane. Anyway, this is a carrier build, so let's look at the pet damage, because that is where the bulk of the DPS is going to be coming from. In total, the pets did 121k worth of DPS, which is over a third of the total DPS of the build. I was actually really surprised to see that the Advanced Valkyrie fighter pets and the Elite Valor fighters did pretty much the same in terms of DPS. In earlier testing, I had seen the Valor fighters do more than that, but at other times I had also seen it get closer to being the same as this. So I'm not totally sure what's going on there. It could just be an RNG thing because, it really just depends on where the fighters are at the time and what you're using and yada yada. There's a lot of this stuff is very much dependent on what is where at the time it's used. But at the same time, maybe the Valor fighters aren't quite as valuable as I thought they were. Because if they're doing the same as the advanced versions of the Valkyries, which those are the ones that are coming from the trait, I'm starting to wonder if maybe the Elite Valkyries would have been better anyway. Though it is important to note that these were being used along with a hangar bay of the Type 7 shuttles, so who knows who was getting more of the debuff that the Type 7s put out? I may have to do further testing on comparing these two. Though before I wrap up, I do think it's important to point out the value of the Elite Valor fighters anyway, because while they are performing quite as well as I thought they would in comparison to the Valkyrie fighters, it is important to remember that these are available as Elite fighters right out of the box. If you buy these from the bundle, you can reclaim them from the C-Store as Elite versions, which is like a huge resource saver. Because Elite pets are not cheap in terms of fleet credits and dilithium. Being able to claim Elite pets right out of the box is really valuable just for the sake of setting up a new character. So yeah, that is my combination lazy boat / fighter support build on the Typhon. I know it's a combination of themes that I've done repeatedly on this channel, but at the same time, anything else I could have put on that ship also would have been something I have done more than once on this channel, and I felt like this was the most interesting and also most authentic to the ship's theme. If you enjoyed the build, leave a comment down below, and while you're down there, be sure to like and subscribe and hit that bell for notifications. If you would like to further support the channel, you can hit that join button to become a member, or you can find the link to the merch store down below, or if you're ever shopping on the Epic Game Store, be sure to use my content creator code STU1701. It really helps me out, and I really do appreciate that. Either way, though, thank you so much for watching. My name's Stu, and I will see you guys next time.